So good morning and good evening, whatever side of this planet you're on. We're here for our second session of Gurdjieff. It's a very balmy, chilly 5:20 a.m. here on the West Coast. How's everybody doing? I see it's going to be a quiet one today. So the water bear, we can put the notes in the channel. I made a note here just directly in Lotus Lounge for my own sake, but it's nothing that needs to be stuck. It's just some talking points for today. As we recap the first 6 pages of last week's beginning session. So let's see here. Bookmark, please, and the page number. So, in recap of last week, we are here at the preface, the introduction, if you will. Gurdjieff touched on where he left off in the amazing All and Everything Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, which was the first series, which comprised of 3 books in the one book, and is the first section of the trilogy of the total 10 books that we'll be getting through at the end of this amazing journey. We're on the second series, which is called Meetings with Remarkable Men. And we're 6 pages in. He started recapping where he left off, and further explaining he's going to be going over 7 important questions. And then he touched on the first question, which we talked about in fairly great length. Just a little quick recap here from his words himself. That he will now propose to give a form of understandable for everyone to everything that he has written down for the second series, in the hope that these ideas may serve as preparatory constructive material for setting up in the consciousness of creatures similar to himself a new world, a world, in my opinion, real, or at least one that can be perceived as real by all degrees of human thinking, without the all and everything Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson. Well, here we go, we're going into the site. Without the slightest impulse of doubt, instead of the illusory world which contemporary people picture to themselves. He goes on to say, in this second series, he intends, among other things, to introduce and elucidate 7 sayings which have come down to our day from very ancient times by means of inspirations on various monuments, which I happened to come across and decipher during my travels. Sayings in which our remote ancestors formulated certain aspects of objective truth, clearly perceptible even to the contemporary human reason. I shall therefore begin with just that one saying which, besides serving as a good starting point for the expositions which follow, will be a link with the last chapter of the first series. This ancient saying, chosen by me from the beginning of the second series of my writings. Only he will deserve the name of man and can count upon anything prepared for him from above, who has already acquired the corresponding data for being able to preserve intact both the wolf and the sheep confided to his care. And that's where we left off last week. Let's go to the notes here. Waterbury, glad we're aligned. Is there anything you wanted to add here from recap's perspective before we jump into continue on our reading? Any other further thoughts on Mullah Nasruddin's amazing quote that we just revisited? I know we got into it pretty deep last week. Got some writing in the chat, just giving it a moment to materialize. As we wait, Mullah Nasruddin is a great, wise individual that Gurdjieff is constantly quoting, and he's someone that has definitely been earmarked for further exploration and discovery. Just waiting here for Waterbury to finish his comment. I'll go ahead and pull up the text in the intro. We're at the top of page 6. In fact, let's see. Yeah. In fact, let's do. Yeah, the top of page 6. So it looks like you're still writing. Let's jump back in the text. The Waterbearer says here in the chat, I want to make a note that Big G is super critical towards contemporary men, but not in a dismissive way, as the contemporary man does when someone brings up higher thought. Big G is critical of the contemporary man in the sense that for Big G, the contemporary man is flawed, missing something of critical importance. End quote. Yes, I agree. He does indeed. In fact, he even further details the flaws of contemporary men is that we rely on data, information to be presented in order for us to move. We don't go off that intuition. We don't have that alignment of our three brain beings, being the three brain beings that we are. So for sure, he's definitely extremely critical toward contemporary men for good reason. And self-awareness is definitely self-awareness leading to self-realization is definitely a core pillar, I think, in the work of Gurdjieff. Wholeheartedly agree. Thank you. So let's jump into the text. Again, top of page 6. Let's go. So reiterating that quote from Mullah Nasruddin. Only he will deserve the name of man and can count upon anything prepared for him from above, who has already acquired corresponding data for being able to preserve intact both the wolf and the sheep confided to his care. Jumping back in, top of page 6. And the correct answer to this popular riddle clearly shows that a man can achieve this not solely by means of the ingenuity which every normal man should have, but that in addition he must not be lazy nor spare his strength, but must cross the river at an extra time for the attainment of his aim. Returning to the meaning of the ancient saying, chosen by me, and keeping in mind the gist of the correct solution of this popular riddle, then, if one thinks about it without any of the preconceptions always arising from the results of the idle thoughts usual to contemporary men, it is impossible not to admit with one's mind and agree with one's feelings that anyone calling himself a man must never be lazy, but constantly devising all sorts of compromises, must struggle with his self-avowed weaknesses in order to attain the aim he has set himself, to preserve intact these two independent animals confided to the care of his reason, and which are, by their very essence, opposite to each other. So jumping out of the text, I think we see here an example of the yin and the yang, the light and the dark, that is woven in the fabric of most all belief systems, in the fundamental core of things, in the structures. Would anybody like to add anything to that? We could move on. Yes, Water Bear, the paradox for sure. Having yesterday finished this, jumping back in the text, having yesterday finished this, as I called it, wiseacring for the swing of thought, this morning I took with me the manuscript of the synopsis I had written for the first 2 years of my activities as a writer, which I intended to use as material for the beginning of this second series, and went into the park to sit down and work in the shade of the historic avenue of trees. After reading the first 2 or 3 pages, forgetting everything around me, I became deeply thoughtful, pondering on how to continue further, and I sat there without writing a single word until very late in the evening. I was so wrapped up in these reflections that I did not once notice that the youngest of my nieces, the one whose task it is to see that Arabian coffee which I usually take, particularly when doing any intensely active physical or mental work, does not become quite cold in the cup, changed it, as I afterwards learned, 23 times. In order that you may understand the seriousness of this engrossed thoughtfulness of mine, and picture to yourself, if only approximately, the difficulty of my situation, I must tell you that after I had read these pages and remembered by association the entire contents of the manuscript I had intended to make use of as an introduction, it became quite clear to me that all this over which I had, as is said, panted during so many sleepless nights, would now, after the changes and additions I had made in the final editing of the first series, be of no use at all. When I understood this, I experienced for about half an hour, the state which Mullah Nasar ad-Din defines by the words to feel oneself plunged in galoshes up to the eyebrows. And I was ready at first to resign myself and came to the decision to rewrite this entire chapter from beginning to end. But afterwards, continuing to recall automatically all sorts of sentences from my manuscript, I remembered, among other things, the place where, in order to explain why I took an attitude of merciless criticism towards contemporary literature, I had introduced the words of a certain intelligent, elderly Persian, which I had heard in my early youth, and which, in my opinion, could not have better described the characteristics of contemporary civilization. I considered it impossible to deprive the reader either of what had been said on this subject, or of all the other thoughts, so as to say, artfully embedded in this passage, thoughts which, for anyone able to decipher them, can be exceedingly valuable material for a correct understanding of what I intend to elucidate in the last two series in a form accessible to any man seeking the truth. And so these considerations compelled me to think out just how, without the reader being deprived of all this, it could be possible for the form of exposition I had first employed to corresponding to the form now required after the great changes made in the first series. In fact, what I had written during the first 2 years of this new profession of mine, which I was forced to adopt, could no longer correspond to what was now required, since I had then put down everything as a first version in the form of a synopsis understandable only to myself, intending to develop all this material in 36 books, devoting each book to one special question. In the third year, I had begun to give to this outline a form of exposition which might be understandable to others, at least to those specially trained in, so to say, abstract thinking. But then, little by little, I had become more adroit in the art of concealing serious thoughts in an enticing, easily grasped outer form, and in making all those thoughts, which I term discernible only with the lapse of time, ensue from others usual to the thinking of most contemporary people. I changed the principle I had been following, and instead of seeking to achieve the aim I had set myself in writing by quantity, I had adopted the principle of attaining this by quality alone. And I began to go over from the beginning everything I had written in the synopsis, with the intention now of dividing it into 3 series and of dividing each of these in the final version into several books. And my becoming so deeply thoughtful today was perhaps also because just yesterday there had been freshly revived in my memory the wise ancient saying, always to strive that the wolf be full and the sheep intact. Finally, when evening drew nigh, and from below the famous Fontainebleau dampness began to come through my English souls and affect my thinking, while from above various of God's dear little creatures called little birds began to evoke more and more frequently a chilly sensation on my completely smooth cranium, there arose in my common presence the bold decision not to have any regard for anyone or anything, but simply to insert in this first chapter of the second series as to what present-day professional writers would call a digressive development. certain polished up fragments of this manuscript, pleasing to me personally, and only afterwards, in continuing further, to hold myself strictly to the principle I had decided upon for the writing of this series. And this solution will be all the better, both for me and for the reader, since I will thus be spared any extra new exertion of my already over-exhausted brains. And the reader, particularly if he has read through everything I have written before, will be able, owing to this digressive development, to represent himself what kind of objectively impartial opinion is formed in the psyche of certain people who have by chance been more or less correctly educated concerning the results of the manifestations of the people of present-day civilization. Just quickly jumping out of the text, the Wolf Bear says, anything you learn, well, you learn through quantity first. And once its basics are learned, then by sheer quality alone, big leaps of progress can be made in time to no time. Very interesting, very profound. I think that quality versus quantity is definitely a mantra I live by personally and bring it up across all aspects of life and living, be it in a formal, structured manner of learning, being something you're learning, to even fundamental building blocks of relationship and exchange and communication and seeking to understand. And I think, a lot of issues and challenges we face now in excess come from not finding that commonality, that common ground, that fundamental connection due to the excessiveness of quantity versus quality. Saying everything and anything in celebration or in effort to what one believes or feels, instead of positioning from a place of seeking to understand and connect with the individual or individuals in which you're communicating with or existing with in that moment of time, or anything that stems from that, especially in platforms, social media platforms. I think it's more than ever, even in design in their algorithms, we're really off kilter here. I'm not sure I understand your question, Wolf Bear. I'm going to continue reading where we left off, which is the top of... One second. Top of page 9. I don't know where this... It's challenging to just post a picture of a sentence. I don't know where this sentence is. So continuing on. Top of page 9. When this introduction was originally planned for the 13th book, I entitled it Why I Became a Writer, and described in it the impressions accumulated in me in the course of my life, which are the basis of my present, not very nattering opinion of the representatives of contemporary literature. In this connection, as I have already said, I introduced the speech which I had heard long ago in my youth, when I was in Persia. For the first time, it happened one day to be in a gathering of Persian intelligentsia, where contemporary literature was being discussed. One of those who spoke a great deal that day was the elderly, intelligent Persian whom I have mentioned. Intelligent not in the European sense of the word, but in the sense in which it is understood on the continent of Asia, that is, not only by knowledge, but by being. He was very well educated and was particularly well acquainted with European culture. He said, among other things, "It is a great pity that the present period of culture, which we call and which people of subsequent generations will of course also call the European civilization, is in the whole process of the perfecting of humanity, as it were, an empty and abortive interval. And this is because, in respect of the development of the mind, that chief impeller to self-perfection, the people of our civilization cannot transmit by inheritance anything of value to their descendants. For example, one of the chief means for developing the mind of man is literature. But what has the literature of contemporary civilization to give? Nothing whatever, except the development of, so to say, word prostitution. Jumping out of the text here. All right. Word prostitution. I mean, I think that's very self-explanatory. He has a way of really slicing, getting right to the jugular. I mean, prostitution is the selling of one's body, the selling of the sexual service in the exchange for money, right? To sell something so intimate and so divine. I mean, it's how you look at it. That's really subjective, but it's the sale of something for money. And so the sale of words for money. Jumping back in the text, the fundamental cause of this corruption of present-day literature is, in my opinion, that the whole attention in writing has gradually, of itself, come to be concentrated not on the quality of the thought and the exactitude with which it is transmitted, but only on the striving for exterior polish, or, as is otherwise said, beauty of style, thanks to which there has finally resulted what I called word prostitution. And in fact, you can spend a whole day reading a lengthy book and not know what the writer wished to say. And only when you have nearly finished, after having wasted so much of your time, already insufficient for the fulfillment of the necessary obligations of life, do you discover that all of this music was built up on an infinitesimal, almost null idea. All contemporary literature falls by content into three categories. The first covers what is called the scientific field, the second consists of narratives, and the third of what are called descriptions. The scientific books usually contain collections of all sorts of old hypotheses, already obvious to everyone, but combined in different ways and applied to various new subjects. In the narratives, or as they are otherwise called, novels, to which bulky volumes are also devoted, for the most part there are descriptions, without sparing any details, of how some John Jones and Mary Smith attain the satisfaction of their love, that sacred feeling which has gradually degenerated in people, owing to their weakness and willlessness, and has now in contemporary man turned completely into a vice, whereas the possibility of its natural manifestation was given to us by our Creator for the salvation of our souls and for the mutual moral support necessary for a more or less happy life together. The third category of books gives descriptions of travels, of adventures, and of the flora and fauna of the most diverse countries. Works of this kind are generally written by people who have never been anywhere and have never in reality seen anything, by people who, as is said, have never crossed their own doorsteps, with very few exceptions. They simply give rein to their imagination or copy various fragments from books written by others, former fantasists just like themselves. With this puny understanding of the responsibility and significance of literary works, the writers of today, in striving ever more and more for beauty of style, sometimes even invent an incredible hodgepodge in verse in order to obtain what their opinion is beauty of consonance, and thereby even further destroy the already feeble sense of everything they write. I mean, just jumping out of the text there for a second, I mean, it's their intention alone deads their efforts at the gate, basically. At least the efforts of which a work should be is to convey the reader and take the reader to a certain place, to a certain understanding. Continuing here, well, let's see. A shout here from the water bear. Regular reading and writing makes one an original thinker. Those are meditative pursuits. Read the last paragraph again kindly. So, okay. The last paragraph begins with this puny understanding. So, so with this puny understanding, reiterating the last paragraph, jumping back in the text. And anybody who would like to read, please speak up. In fact, let's take a second to see who's we got here as I toggle between texts. Everybody doing all right? Anybody want to read? All right. So I shall continue. Continuing here at the bottom of page 10, as per requested by the water bear, reiterating this last paragraph, and we will continue to flow. With this puny understanding of the responsibility and significance of literary works, the writers of today, in striving ever more and more for beauty of style, sometimes even invent an incredible hodgepodge in verse in order to obtain what, in their opinion, is beauty of consonance, and thereby even further destroy the already feeble sense of everything they write. Strange as it may seem to you, in my opinion, a great deal of harm to contemporary literature has been brought about by grammars, namely the grammars of the languages of all the peoples who take part in what I call the common malphonic concert of contemporary civilization. I just want to take a moment out of the text. Holy smokes, that was thunderous. Let me reiterate. Wow. Common malphonic concert. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Common malphonic concert. It just like it just thunders through my body, my beingness. Like there's no other it's just the most perfect surgical specificity that just sings, sings and sings. Water Bear agrees. Common melphonic concert. Yep, that's exact. Whew. Let's just take it to the top of that sentence. Reiterating, jumping back in the text. Strange as it may seem to you, in my opinion, a great deal of harm to contemporary literature has been brought about by grammars, namely the grammars of the languages of all the peoples who take part in what I call the common melphonic concert of contemporary civilization. I'm going to jump out and show you everyone this visual. The water bear here is posted in the chat. It's very fitting, to say the least. In fact, let's enlarge that here. If common melphonic concert was a gift, which is interesting because gifts most often than not don't have sound. Jumping back in. The grammars of their different languages are, in most cases, constructed artificially and have been composed and continue to be altered chiefly by a category of people who, in respect of understanding real life and the language evolved from it for mutual relations, are quite illiterate. On the other hand, among all the peoples of past epochs, as ancient history very definitely shows us, grammar was always formed gradually by life itself, according to the different stages of their development, the climatic conditions of their chief place of existence, and the predominant means of obtaining food. Driven by necessity, jumping out of the text, driven by necessity, nonetheless. A life existing intention, very different from the ego-driven, how one individual is to be perceived as the writer, and have nothing to do with the subject matter or the have intention of divulging or walking experientially the reader through an understanding outside of the writer themselves. So continuing, jumping back in the text. In present day civilization, the grammars of certain languages so greatly distort the meaning of what the writer wishes to transmit that the reader, especially if he is a foreigner, is deprived of the last possibility of grasping even the few minute thoughts which, if expressed differently, that is, without this grammar, might perhaps still be understood. I'd like to jump out for 1 second and really commend Gurdjieff again for his surgical, communicative ability. I can't tell you how many times over the course of reading aloud during the 46 consecutive weeks of Gurdjieff Gang, Belize Bob's tales to his grandson, and hearing, people swim in and out of VC saying things like, oh, this guy's so pretentious. I mean, he just says all these words when he could just be saying one sentence, he's saying a whole paragraph, he's saying a whole page, when he could just, surmise it to one sentence. It's just, it's really being stuck on expectation of grammar and linguistically communication to be efficient by only the means of getting to the point. And I think this is a reflection of, let's focus on the destination, folks, and completely missed the journey, okay? Life is not about when we're born and when we die. It's everything in between, inclusive of when we're born and when we die. I hear something coming in from the chat. From the Watch Bear. He's not giving us a piece of his mind. He's sharing his being truthfully. Amen, brother. I 100% agree. This is, I get chills even right now in reading that because it's so true. I mean, Gurdjieff he really pours his soul and his beingness, and it's yes, period. And even he explained just earlier in this session that we were talking about how he had written so much and he wanted it to be this, all these books, 36 books or whatever, I think he said. And he ended up revisiting the entire thing. He threw up on the page, right? He got it all out. And look, as a writer, as someone, who's putting in all this work, that ego could have been like, well, I've done all this, and let's just do it this way, and all this work I've done, all this time I've wasted, this whole concept of space and time really gets us. You're not getting any younger. This quantification and valuation and measurability, it really takes us for the loop-de-loos. When again, coming back to beingness and being in the moment, to truly being the driver of your existence, right? Quality versus quantity is the way. It is the only way. It is beingness. It is taking the breath, being aware of the breath, feeling the breath expand your lungs, breathing from your diaphragm, hugging someone and calibrating your heartbeats, and feeling this flesh to flesh, the skin to skin, feeling the eyelashes on your face. When it rains outside, feeling the rain on your skin. When the sun kisses you, the moment you step out the door, you don't cringe and move backward, but you smile and step into it. Truly being present. So jumping back in the text. On the other hand, among all peoples of past epochs, as ancient history very definitely shows us, grammar was always formed gradually by life itself, according to the different stages of their development, the climatic conditions of their chief place of existence, and the predominant means of obtaining food. In present-day civilization, the grammars of certain languages so greatly distort the meaning of what the writer wishes to transmit that the reader, especially if he is a foreigner, is deprived of the last possibility of grasping even the few minute thoughts which, if expressed differently, that is, without this grammar, might perhaps still be understood. In order to make clear what I have just said, this elderly, intelligent Persian continued, I will give as an example an episode which took place in my own life. As you know, of all the persons near to my blood, the only one still living is my nephew, on the paternal side, who a few years ago, having inherited an oil well situated in the environs of Baku, was obliged to move there. And so I go from time to time to that town, because my nephew, being always very occupied with his numerous commercial affairs, is seldom able to leave and visit me, his old uncle, here at our birthplace. The district where these oil wells are located are also in the town of Baku, belong at the present time to Russia, which, as one of the large nations of contemporary civilization, produces an abundance of literature. Almost all the inhabitants of the town of Baku and its environs are of diverse races having nothing in common with the Russian. And in their own households, they speak their native languages. But for outer mutual relations, they are compelled to use Russian. During my visits there, I came in contact with all kinds of people, and having to speak with them for various personal needs, I decided to learn this language. I had to learn so many languages in my lifetime that the learning of Russian did not present any great difficulty for me. Before very long, I was able to speak it quite fluently, but of course, like all the local inhabitants, with an accent and only after a fashion. As one who has now become, to some degree, a linguist, oh my goodness, the brain. Let me start that sentence over. As one who has now become, to some degree, a linguist, I consider it necessary to remark here, by the way, that it is never possible to think in a foreign language, even though knowing it to perfection. If one continues to speak one's native language or some other language in which one is accustomed to thinking. And therefore, when I began to speak Russian, continuing all while to think in Persian, I was searching mentally for words in the Russian language to correspond with my Persian thoughts. I mean, just stopping for a second there, that's very profound. Because now we're talking contextually and culturally. Language is very much aligned with culture. And so if you are existing in a cultural way that is intuitive to you based on, all the time of your life to this moment, and you have learned a language and you're trying to ascribe based on your cultural expression through the lens of a foreign language, there's something very displaced there. Let's continue to see what Gurdjieff has to say. Oh, wait. Oh, he's Wurtbers. I don't know what I said. He said, "Well put there, dear lady." I don't know what I said. Was it well put by me, or was I reiterating Gurdjieff? So here we go. And it was then I became aware of various incongruities, at first quite inexplicable to me, in this contemporary civilized language, on account of which it was sometimes impossible to transmit exactly the simplest and most ordinary expressions of our thoughts. Let's hit that again. This is very profound. And it was then that I became aware of various incongruities, at first inexplicable to me, in this contemporary civilized language, on account of which it was sometimes impossible to transmit exactly the simplest and most ordinary expressions of our thoughts. I mean, jumping out of the text, this is fundamental communication building blocks here. The foundations from which to grow conceptually, to grow communicatively, to grow understanding, understanding to any degree. Jumping back in the text. Becoming interested in this and being free of all life obligations, I began to study Russian grammar and later the grammars of several other modern languages. I then understood that the cause of the incongruities I had noticed lay precisely in these artificially composed grammars of theirs, and there began to be formed in me the firm conviction which I have just expressed to you, that the grammars of the languages in which contemporary literature is written are invented by people who, in respect of true knowledge, are on a lower level than any ordinary simple people. As a concrete illustration of what I have just said, I shall point out among the many incongruities in the Russian language which I noticed at the very beginning, the one that led me to make a detailed study of this question. Jumping out of the text, Water Bear is saying, "It was you." Then he's saying, "Most quarrels are born out of simple miscommunication that arise from bad language skills, in parentheses, bad thinking, thought quality, depth, and language skill correspond to each other, close parentheses." For sure. One hundo. I think, I second that. I underscore that. I 100% align with that. So many things, so many divisions, so many quarrels, so many misunderstandings, right, are born from confusion, from misinterpretation, which one could say derives from miscommunication, uh, misspeaking, misspoken, like, emotionally charged, exponents of identity, uh, my way, my perspective, my what I believe, me, my, I, the me, my, I, me. It's the one way, the one lens, for sure. I wholeheartedly agree. One moment, taking a pause for the cause. Let's bring it back. This amazing music that we have experienced through Gurdjieff gangs throughout. And let's jump back if would anybody else like to read? All right. What do we got going on here? We've got Water Bear here in the chat saying, "An unexamined life is not worth living." Indeed, from the great words of Socrates. Was a G2, indeed. Socrates beautifully said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." I mean, there's so many ways to unpack that. I would even go as far as to extend that into an unexamined life is you're unable to live. It's not even a life of living versus, it's in even translating the worth living. It's not even a life of existence, of living. For sure. Well said. So jumping back in the text. Bounce, 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 bounce. Let's see where I left off. Yes, it's the bottom of page 12. We're really rocking and rolling today. Let's take a look at the time. All right. I think we've got one more thing on the chat. No. Let's jump back in. Last sentence of page 12. Wait. Waterbury, yep, I agree with that interpretation of the big S. Quote by you, kind lady. Oh my goodness. I wouldn't say, interpretation, yes, even like a little, like spoke, a little extension, but completely understand and respect the core roots of that statement being a standalone importance in and of itself because it's all encompassing. Bam. Page 12, last sentence. As a concrete illustration of what I have just said, I shall point out, among the many incongruities in the Russian language, which I noticed at the very beginning, the one that led me to make a detailed study of this question. Once, when I was conversing in Russian and, as usual, was translating my thoughts, which formed themselves Persian fashion, I found it necessary to use an expression which we Persians often employ in conversation. Mayandaram, which means in French, je dis, and in English, I say. And jumping out of the text, pardon for any mispronunciation there across the board, jumping back in the text. But try as I might, searching my memory for a corresponding word in Russian, I could not find one. In spite of my knowing by this time almost all the words of this language, used either in literature or for the ordinary mutual relations of people of all levels of intellectuality. Not finding a corresponding word for this simple expression, so often used by us, I, of course, at first decided that I simply did not yet know it, and I began to search in my numerous dictionaries and to inquire of certain people who were considered authorities for some Russian word which would correspond to this Persian meaning of mine. However, it turned out that in modern Russian there is no such word at all, but instead a word is used, namely Ya Gohavriu, which means in Persian Mayan Solyaram, in French Je parle, and in English I speak. So just jumping out of the text there, again, apologies for any mispronunciation. He was looking for the equivalent to the English word I say in the Russian language. The closest he could find is I speak, I say, I speak. Very different things here in the same wheelhouse of communication. I say, I speak. One can speak and not really say anything. One can speak and not really say anything. Jumping back in the text. Since you Persians have the same sort of thinking, faculty as I have for digesting the meaning conveyed by words, I therefore ask you, could I, or any other Persian on reading in contemporary Russian literature, a word corresponding to the meaning of Soliyaram, accept it without instinctive disturbance as having the same meaning as the word diorama. Of course not. Soliyaram and diorama, or speak and say, are two quite different experienced actions. I mean, let's jump out of the text here. It's like saying to listen and to hear. To listen and to hear. To speak and to say. You can hear me, but are you listening? You are speaking, but are you really saying anything? For example, let's break it down even more. Blah blah blah, blah 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 blah, blah blah blah, blah blah blah. Yeah, I was speaking right there. I was speaking it up. But what the heck was I saying? Anybody? I think that kind of knocks on the door a little bit. Let's go to Wash Bear in the chat. Yep, I agree with that extension of the big ass quote by you, kind lighty. By the way, French gets a lot of direct influence from Persian language. Fascinating. Saying is directly addressing someone, direct. Speaking is doing it indirectly, passively. I agree. That's a very fundamental differential there. Yes. Jumping back in the text, this is the last paragraph of page 13. This very minor example is characteristic of thousands of other incongruities to be found in all languages of the peoples who represent the so-called flower of contemporary civilization. And it is these incongruities which prevent the literature of today from serving as the basic means for developing the minds of those peoples who are considered representatives of this civilization, and also of those peoples who, at the present time, obviously for reasons already suspected by certain persons with common sense, are somehow deprived of the good fortune of being considered civilized, and are therefore, as historical data bear witness, usually called backward. Owing to all these incongruities of language existing in contemporary literature, any man, particularly a man from races not included among the representatives of contemporary civilization, let me read that again, because there's a specific flow and utilization. I'm jumping out of text for now. There's a specific flow and utilization of punctuation that is very like, wow. So let me have a little bit of water here. Take a pause for the cause. High quality H2O is the bedrock of life. Yes, let's have another. Let's all join in a water moment. Let's have a hydrating moment. And let's share this together. Let's have a breath this moment. Let's take a moment to just really appreciate being here together in this moment, this beautiful moment, this amazing, magnificent blessing of this moment. All right, let's take it from the top of the first paragraph on this page of 14. Owing to all these incongruities of language existing in contemporary literature, any man, particularly a man from races not included among the representatives of contemporary civilization, who has a more or less normal thinking faculty and is able to give words their real meaning, will, of course, on hearing or reading any word used in an incorrect sense, as in the example just given, perceive the general thought of a sentence according to this incorrectly employed word, and as a result will grasp something quite different from what this sentence was intended to express. Jumping out of the text, Water Bear in the chat, flower of civilization sounded sarcastic to me. Civilization was described right afterwards, like an invasive species of weed. Kudos to catching that. I mean, Gurdjieff has a lot of that innuendo. But it's not, it's all by design, for sure. I mean, how could you just even, everything is so surgical. Jumping back in, second paragraph on 14, page 14. Although the ability to grasp the meaning contained in words differs in different races, the data for sensing the repeated experienced actions which are already well established in the process of the life of people are formed in all of them alike by life itself. Let's say that again. Although the ability to grasp the meaning contained in words differs in different races, The data for sensing the repeated experienced actions, which are already well established in the process of the life of people, are formed in all of them alike by life itself. So, jumping out of the text, my interpretation of what he's saying here is something that has actually been my purview into this experience of life since a very young child. As I have lived all over the world, I jumped around actually very frequently growing up, for, due to family structures and so on and so forth. And going to school has been very profound in experiencing culture. I mean, to experience the school experience is to truly experience a fundamental of a culture, for which this is where the kids are raised. This is the learning fundamental of the culture. And outside of the academia, you also experience the culture of the children together and the interactivity there. And what he's saying here is, look, language is one thing. We all experience this human journey of life, these ups and downs, these twists and turns, these pains, these pleasures, this love, this sorrow, this push and pull, the gravitas of unknowing, discovery, learning, being, seeing, believing, faith, all the things. The language is a form of communication from which to connect, but there's a deeper resonance there, and that's beingness. I like to bring it to akin to a smile. A smile is a smile in every language. A laugh is a laugh in every language. Emotion, crying, a hug is a hug in every language. Presence is presence in every language, not as in the word, in its experience. Breath is breath in every language, not in word, in experience. Just taking a moment to reflect truly of how truly we are connected. We are connected. We are one in this experience. We have far more in common than that in which we do not. And there's a beauty there. There's a resonance of interconnectivity and joy that is truly rooted in existence. And it's far deep within the layers of the mental constructs, and as Gurdjieff says, modern civilization. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's there for all of us to peel back the layers of our mental constructs. It will always be there. Jumping back in the text, taking a look at the time. All right. The very absence in the present day Russian language of a word exactly expressing the meaning of the Persian word diaram, which I have taken as an example, can serve to confirm my seemingly unfounded statement that the illiterate upstarts of our time, who call themselves grammarians, and what is worse, are considered such by those around them, have succeeded in transforming even the language elaborated by life itself into, so to say, German ersatz. All right, I'm gonna have to earmark that one. German ersatz. Let's see. see what Washbear has to say here. Flower of civilization sounded sarcastically. Okay, we talked about that. You say the most profound things in such simple language. Say exquisite, Lighty. you're so sweet. Hey, it's not my truth. It's the truth. It's the fundamental truth. It comes from the heart. It's beyond mine. It's that pure emote. It is the language of love. It is the feelings in my heart of hearts. Feeling is a superpower, and it is one we are all blessed with. It is the way. Appreciate you, Washbear. All right, jumping back in. I must tell you here that when I began to study Russian grammar, and also the grammars of several other modern languages in order to determine the causes of the numerous incongruities, I decided, being in general attracted to philology, to acquaint myself also with the history of the origins and development of the Russian language. And my study of its history proved to me that formerly it had contained exactly corresponding words for all the experienced actions already fixed in the process of the life of people. And it was only when this language, having reached a relatively high degree of development in the course of centuries, became, in its turn, an object for the, quote, sharpening of the beaks of ravens, unquote. That is to say, an object of wiseacring for various illiterate upstarts, that many words were distorted or even entirely ceased to be used merely because their connaissance did not answer to the requirements of civilized grammar. Among these latter was the very word I searched for, which exactly corresponded to our diaram, and which was then pronounced Gazifalo. Skazivayo. I mean, is the accent too much? I'm trying to channel it, you know what I mean? Like, Skazivayo. I can't do it, dude. Skazivayo. I'm just gonna go with that. Oh, here we go. Skazivayo. There you go. Apologies for the pronunciation. I'm sure I'm butchering it. Jumping back in the text. It is interesting to notice that this word has been preserved even up to the present time, but is used, and in the sense exactly corresponding to its meaning, only by people who, although they belong to the Russian nation, happen to be isolated from the effects of present-day civilization, that is to say, by people of various country districts situated far from any center of culture. This artificially invented grammar of the languages of today, which the younger generation everywhere is now compelled to learn, is in my opinion one of the fundamental causes of the fact that among contemporary European people, only one of the three independent data necessary for obtaining a sane human mind has developed, namely their so-called thought, which tends to predominate in their individuality, whereas without feeling and instinct, as every man with a normal reason must know, the real understanding accessible to man cannot be formed. To sum up everything that has been said about the literature of our times, I cannot find better words to describe it than the expression, "it has no soul." Say again. To sum up everything that has been said about the literature of our times, I cannot find better words to describe it than the expression, "it has no soul." Mm, mm, mm. Jumping to the chat, Water Bear, truth can only be realized, cannot be taught. Oh yeah. I mean, it can realize through experience, yeah? Gotta experience it. How can I describe to you what the sun feels like when it kisses your skin? How can I describe to you the beauty of a rose? It's the sense, everything. It's in experiencing. It's being present. It's in the beingness. It's the look of the rose. It's the feel of the rose. It's the smell of the rose. You know, it's the beingness of the rose. It's the way the light hits the rose. It's the way the breeze carries the rose. How do you describe a ripe peach, sweet, soft to the lips, on a summer's day, like, you know, fresh from the garden? Like, how do you describe seeing an old friend unexpectedly? How do you describe love? What is the sound of love? Jumping back in the text, and I think, you know, we're gonna wrap it up here. It's the it's the bottom section of page 15. Contemporary civilization has destroyed the soul of literature, as of everything else to which it has turned its gracious attention. I have all the more grounds for criticizing so mercilessly this result of modern civilization, since according to the most reliable historical data, which have come down to us from remote antiquity, we have definite information that the literature of former civilizations had indeed a great deal to assist in the development of the mind of man, and the results of this development, transmitted from generation to generation, could still be felt even centuries later. In my opinion, the quintessence of an idea can sometimes be very well transmitted to others by means of certain antidotes and proverbs formed by life. I think this is a good place to stop. Bottom of page 15. Let's earmark this bad boy. Yeah, baby. What does everybody think about today's smorgasbord of truth? The water bear is happy. He likes. He says, the majority is always wrong. The minority is rarely right. Henrik Bison? What is this? Ibsen? Yes, I agree. Hear, hear. Henrik Ibsen, I think it is. Yeah. The majority is always wrong. The minority is really right. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, so that brings us to closing of today's Gurdjieff. Does anybody have any last comments, questions, revelations, suggestions? All right. I see Water Bear typing away here. He says, I like this slow reading. I really like it. Fabulous. Well, there's no other way to truly comprehend. So here we go with the words again. To read is one thing, to comprehend is another. You can read something 200 times and not comprehend it. It's the same as speaking and saying. We can read the whole book and not comprehend the book. We can speak the whole book and, well, no, even in speaking the whole book, we are truly saying. That doesn't necessarily mean we're comprehending what we're saying or what we're speaking. Just because we're speaking the book doesn't mean we comprehend what it's saying. There we go. And we can twiddly-do, twiddly-dee, and weave that and plot it every which way. It really comes down to the fundamental. Yep. So that wraps up this second part of, or the second turn of Meetings with Remarkable Men. Love to Gurdjieff gang, 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 Gurdjieff gang. And we are out. Live with your hearts.